This is probably worst case scenario for ICE's relationship with Minneapolis, which you would think could not get any lower. But I do think that they found a way to go lower. Sometimes you like, I'll watch like a performance in boxing and I'll think, my God, that was bad, right? And I think, God, somebody throw it in. But sometimes it just manages to get worse. You know, at first you're like, oh, they got no snap in their punches. Oh, now they don't know how to cut off the ring. Oh man, their cut man doesn't know what they're doing. It seems like they're making the cuts bigger. Oh God, my God, they have no clue what they're doing. My God, his shorts are almost falling off, and you just see such a just a piss poor performance, and how Greg Bovino, Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller, and everybody else who is leading forward Trump's immigration strategy and deportation strategy, how they have held the public relations cannot be in a worse manner. They have gone out in public and strangled their relationship with the public over and over and over again, and it has not been anywhere worse than in Minneapolis. Nowhere worse. Now, the death of Alex Preddy and the death of Renee Good were also already national scandals. But in between those deaths and in between the masked agents and the Fourth Amendment violations, concerns about the 10th Amendment, hell, even the FBI secretary, the FBI director, the same FBI director that gives out Punisher coins to show how cool and based he is, to show that, you know, the deep state is truly being drained. He was even making threats against the Second Amendment after the shooting of Alex Preddy, saying that people can't bring guns to a protest of all things.
As Christie said, you cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple. You don't have that right to break the law and incite violence. We will, of course, always protect your First Amendment speech. And if you peacefully protest, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you have seen a trend here, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, in these protests turning into violent scenarios and people attacking law enforcement. That's when you go over the line, and that's when law enforcement steps in.
Now, here at the Dylan Burns TV channel, we appreciate the Second Amendment. We appreciate the First Amendment. We even appreciate the lesser known and appreciated amendments like the Fourth Amendment, which seem to be under some pressure lately. And I believe that you should practice all of them. But in its relationship with the public, these amendments had on multiple times been trampled upon, whether it was somebody insults an ICE officer, and so they're going to be thrown in the back of an ICE vehicle, as was the case with that one young target worker, a minor, by the way, who was tackled to the ground by ICE agents and then dropped off hours later, bruised up, bloodied, and crying at a different parking lot. Or we could talk about the different times they had gone onto private property without warrants. Or you could talk about the fact that basically all of these ICE agents operate without identifying themselves, no clear badge numbers. So if you wanted to call a report and good luck with that, you can try. But, you know, this is going to be an internal review process where the public faces that you would usually think could be held to account is not being publicly shown. These are not members of the community. These are people who have come from out of state. These are feds from out of town who will not identify themselves when enforcing laws on you. After multiple times we've seen ICE agents go out and trample on people's rights, whether it be First Amendment rights, whether it be people's Fourth Amendment rights, or whether it just be just general negligent behavior. And so it's really hard to try to rebuild a fledgling relationship to make the public trust you and want to work with you if at the same time you're trying to gain their trust, you're not even willing to show your face. You know, this is not something that, beat cops from the local police force get. This is something that, Marines that are like crossing deserts to go fight battles, they cover up their faces and shit. They got their name, Sergeant, and then they'll have their name on it, But somehow, ICE officers, they have some special exemption when it comes to having to show their identity when engaging with the public. Even at a time when they have the least trust when it comes to the American public out of any law enforcement agency, ICE has the least trust, which is really saying something when you've got the record that certain other law enforcement agencies have. So these two shootings occur, Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Alex Preddy's case is being investigated by the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Renee Good's case is not, which typically is not, because that's not typical. Typically, the way that it would go is that anytime there was a shooting involving a civilian, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, DOJ, would be on it, regardless. But that's not happening in Renee Good's case. Both of these caused a lot of trouble for ICE's image. They caused a lot of pain locally in Minneapolis. And it really blew up in the administration's face when they were trying to like lean into it. Oh, Operation Metro Surge. You know, Trump is the type of guy to post AI edits of helicopters coming into your neighborhood. And then he thinks that like helps his image, right? That's what he did with the Windy City of Chicago. Chicago was literally burning in his AI edit, right? So this type of rhetoric, this type of messaging is very regular for them. But this time they went a little bit too far. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot of bit too far. And then they tried to pull back. The thing that's interesting about this, though, is that between the Alex Preddy shooting and the Renee Good shooting, there was another shooting. In fact, 2 people were shot in the leg. And the way that the story went, and the reason why that this didn't get as much attention as the Alex Preddy shooting and the Renee Good shooting, is not only because it was not a lethal shooting, people were shot in the leg instead of getting shot brutally. It was not just because there was no like video footage of it, whereas the case of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, you could see, and so the government could say whatever they wanted, but you can see, and that obviously affects what you believe. But lastly, it was because reportedly it was a self-defense case. While the government tried to argue it was self-defense in the Renee Good case and the Alex Preddy case, the footage that was subsequently published completely wiped away any self-defense case that could be made on Alex Preddy. He was not attacking them. He was not brandishing his gun, as Stephen Miller suggested. And in the Renee Good case, it is a difficult argument. It is one that they could try to make before a judge about self-defense and trying to defend themselves against the vehicle. But to say that it's clear cut that she was trying to ram, that's just a straight lie. Whereas in the case between them, where these 2 people were shot in the leg, the story was, as reported by officers on the scene, was that there was a man that ICE was trying to detain. They fled ICE. They crashed their vehicle. They continued to run away from ICE. And while continuing to run away from ICE, 2 people came out, one with a broomstick, like a broom handle of a broom, and the other with a snow shovel. And then they started to beat up the ICE officers, bashing them over the head and such. And after they were getting bashed over the head and beaten up, after you have one person they're trying to detain struggling to get away, scuffling with officers, and 2 others beating them over the head with a stick and a shovel, one of the ICE officers relents, takes out their gun, fires, shoots 2 people in the leg, and then continues with the detainment. Now, that was the story that the officers that went and executed the detainment and went and ended up shooting people. That's what they told ICE. That's what ICE went out and told the general public on January 15th when this shooting occurred. And so the way that they advertised it was, after the Renee Good shooting, which looked very bad for them, they could say, look, this is an instance of our officers being attacked, where we're trying to tell the public of the struggles that we're facing in the Minneapolis area, that we're facing, resistance, and that this is quite bad. And so due to the fact that you had footage of the Renee Good case, you had footage of the Alex Preddy case, that there was a self-defense element that was being expressed by the officers involved. There's no footage. It was the fact that nobody died. It did not get nearly as much attention as the other shootings. But I remember at the time when I read the report, another shooting occurred, I went to the footage at the scene. There were people protesting almost immediately. There were people angry almost immediately. And it was the death of Alex Preddy and the lion's share of evidence that brought people, I don't want to say brought people away from the shooting of these 2 other people, but dragged people's attention to other matters. Now, a month after the shooting, nearly a month after the shooting of these 2 people, we are finding out from ICE, not from the liberal media, not from any sort of, propaganda outlet, whatever you have in your mind, but from ICE themselves. They're saying the people that were shot here, the story that was put out by officers does not seem to be true. It's a lie. Our officers lied about what happened. And now the defense attorney for these people who are having charges put against them by the officers who shot them are now trying to get the case completely thrown out, saying, hey, look, they lied. Can't trust anything these guys are saying. Listen to the report here. The acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement says that two of its officers appear to have made untruthful statements about shooting a migrant in Minnesota and may face federal charges for their actions. Today, a joint review by ICE and the Department of Justice of video evidence has revealed that sworn testimony provided by two separate officers appear to have made untruthful statements. So these are two officers lying with each other. Both officers have been immediately placed on administrative leave pending the completion of a thorough internal investigation. Lying under oath is a serious federal offense. The U.S. Attorney's Office is actively investigating these false statements. The men and women of ICE are entrusted with upholding the rule of law and are held to the highest standards of professionalism, integrity, and ethical conduct. Violation of this sacred sworn oath will not be tolerated. ICE remains fully committed to transparency, accountability, and the fair enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. The statement from Lyons comes a day after the top federal prosecutor in Minnesota asked a judge to dismiss charges against two men, including one who was shot in the leg by an immigrant agent, citing newly discovered evidence and what was initially framed as a violent attack on law enforcement during an enforcement operation. Newly discovered evidence in this matter is materially inconsistent with the allegations in the complete affidavit, as well as a preliminary hearing testimony. U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota, Daniel Rosen, wrote in the filing Wednesday evening. It remains unclear what specific new evidence Rosen was referring. Rosen has asked the court to dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning the charges cannot be refiled. Accordingly, dismissal with prejudice will serve the interests of justice, he wrote. In the wake of the shooting, a week after an ICE agent fatally shot Renee Good, the Trump administration said the man who was shot, Julio Cesar Solesiles, attacked a federal law enforcement officer with a shovel or a broomstick, that the incident was part of an attempt to evade arrest and obstruct law enforcement. So they're saying that he attacked them with a broomstick, shovel or broomstick. Lawyers for another man charged in the incident, Alfredo Alrana, said surveillance videos did not corroborate the FBI's claim that an agent was assaulted, and said that Sosa Siles was shot while standing at his doorway some distance from the officer. Mind you, what the officer said that they were attacking him with a broomstick and or shovel, which you would imagine you either know it was a broomstick or it was a shovel. I don't know how it's a broomstick and or shovel, but a broomstick and or shovel. That was originally what was being alleged. And now they're saying that the video footage, different from what the officers on the scene testified, actually shows him standing in his doorway, not swinging anything at an officer. Earlier this month, attorneys for the man also urged a judge to prohibit the government from deporting key witnesses who they said cast doubt that an agent was repeatedly struck with a broom or a snow shovel. The judge granted the request. The reversal on the assault charge comes after several discrepancies emerged between the statements from the Department of Homeland Security officials and the details outlined in court records regarding their arrest. DHS initially said in statements to the media the officers were conducting a targeted traffic stop for him when he fled in his vehicle, crashed into another car, and attempted to evade arrest. And here's the thing. They didn't just lie about, what was shown on the video. The agency alleged that Sosa violently assaulted an officer and two others, and that a nearby resident joined in with the attack. According to DHS, he struck the officer with a shovel or broomstick, prompting the officer to fire what the agency described as a defensive shot to defend his life. What we saw last night in Minneapolis was an attempted murder of federal law enforcement. Man, Kristi Noem's on a roll, ain't she? However, an affidavit from a special agent, Timothy Sanchez, who investigated the shooting, stated that ICE enforcement and removal operation agents were attempting to stop a different man identified as Barrera, not Solia Siles, whom they believed was in the country illegally. According to Sanchez, agents later identified the driver DHS agents stopped as a different man, Alrona. Sanchez wrote that he was struck a pole and then fled on foot towards his apartment building. Siles, Sosa Siles, the man that, was in his doorway, was allegedly standing on the porch and yelling at him to run faster. He then slipped and began tussling with the agent before Siles grabbed a broom and began striking the agent, according to the affidavit. The agent then saw who he believed was a third Hispanic male approach with a snow shovel, and this man also began striking him. The third man was identified as Gabriel Alondro Hernandez, who accused him of also assaulting the officer. Siles was shot in the leg as he attempted to go inside the apartment. So, the way that they throw this out is that this man is striking him and it was a self-defense case, right? Now, if because right now we're getting contradictory stories. ICE is saying that they're lying. And so I say we're just gonna have to wait until we see whatever footage is available, body cam, surveillance video, or otherwise. What could end up being the case, and from reading the full statement, sounds like it's leading in this direction, is that these officers did chase after a man, not the man that they originally said that they were actually chasing after, a different man than this man who was then identified, uh, scuffled with them, tried to remove him, tried to encourage a man to run away. And then as he was running away after the scuffling, whether a broomstick was swung or not, we don't know. Maybe it was swung, maybe it hit him, maybe it didn't. Because at this point, we really don't know. But if he did or did not, the new affidavit says that he was shot in the leg while attempting to get back into his home. If that's the case, then that's not as clear cut a self-defense case. If somebody attacks an officer and then flees and is running away and then is shot in the back, that's a different self-defense case than if somebody attacked them and then were shot in the front as they're attacking them. It will also be a different case if he didn't attack them at all. Either way, the story of who they were going after and the story of when he was shot and the circumstances of him being shot ended up being a lie. Now, is this as egregious as the cases of Renee Good and Alex Peretti? I don't really want to put any of this on like a scale. Maybe not. Again, there's still lies involved. And, there might be a case of, they're fleeing on foot and there was a scuffle where something could have been swung at an agent. We're going to have to wait until we see all of the evidence because we're finding out that some of the evidence that was previously presented ended up being falsified, as in, the testimony that was being given by these officers. But either way, the one connecting thread between them all is that at some point, either an administration official or an officer involved lied. In the case of Renee Good, they said that she was a terrorist, that she tried to ram officers. The president even tried to suggest that the man almost went under her tires, that she was some sort of paid agitator terrorist. None of this ended up being true. The DOJ Civil Rights Division launched no investigation, as is typically the case, and instead there was an investigation launched into the widow of the person who was shot 3 times in the head and had their children orphaned. Then, after those lies, we move on to this shooting, where the officers on the scene lied, and then the ICE officials above them, like lions, then repeated those lies for the general public. Whether lions knew it was a lie at the time or not, we don't know, but we could at the very least say that the officers involved in the shooting lied. At least 2 officers, according to ICE, lied. Then you move on to the Alex Peretti case. You move on to the Alex Peretti case, and what we were originally told is that a domestic terrorist, fully loaded with 2 very powerful, fully loaded magazines, right? That he was going in there and that he brandished his gun, giving the idea that he pointed his gun at officers. And after brandishing his gun, he was about to engage in some sort of terrorist attack because he was described as a terrorist. And after this terrorist brandished his gun, the officers had to take him out to protect the public. What actually happened was a man who got in between an officer who just shoved a woman to the ground, put his hands up to divide him, to get him away from that woman. He was then struggled with after being pepper sprayed in the face. He was then brought to the ground, hit again and again and again over the head with his gun always in his holster before his holster was removed, and he shot roughly 12 times by 2 officers. And we still to this day don't know if the first shot was a misfire. Still do not know. That will likely be revealed in the future. In this case, thankfully, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division is investigating it. But it only launched that investigation when before there was, we're going to do a probe. And that probe is going to be backed up by the FBI's forensics team. And that probe is going to be led by the DHS, even though DHS usually doesn't do that type of thing. Well, now it is the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. But considering previous lies that have been made about Renee Good's death, that have been made about the shooting in the case of the man fleeing on foot after crashing his car, And now, in the case of Alex Preddy, this means that every single shooting case involving Customs and Border Patrol and ICE in the city of Minneapolis, government officials have lied about it or officers have lied about it. Every single one. Why was Minneapolis so angry? Why was there so much protest in the middle of winter? Why did so many people take time out of their days anytime they saw ICE agents or anybody even look like ICE agents? They'd go in signal chats, they'd report it to the community chat, and then they'd go out with whistles and blow and blow and blow. I still got, they were handing out whistles to everybody. Like, I had a camera. It was very clear I was a journalist. Anybody asked, I'd say I press. But they had so many of these things. I was actually looking, I don't have it in my pocket, but I have it in my jacket over there. But I even have whistles because they were handing them out so much because people would go on their front porches and blow the whistle if ICE was in town. What makes a retiree do that? What makes somebody between the ages of 16 to 90 go out and do that? I saw working class people doing it. I saw people from the activist class, of course, doing it. I saw elderly people doing it. I was talking to people who drove out 60 miles, elderly women who drove out 60 miles to hold up signs that said "Rain in Ice." Yeah, that's a commie radical, a commie domestic terrorist. An elderly woman driving 60 miles to say "Rain in Ice." And they said they're behaving very rude. They need to reel in their behavior. The way that you were able to get this bipartisan rejection of ICE, where I'm seeing Gadsden flags, the "Don't Tread on Me" flags, right next to American flags being carried by college liberals, being carried next to working class people carrying signs, next to elderly people, elderly couples, next to parents taking around their kids in a stroller, which became an issue when people started doing those "fuck ICE" chants. They would be like "F ICE" and they'd block the kids' ears, or like they'd be like "End ICE," or they would like change the chant for their kid. Good luck with that. But the reason why I was able to motivate so many different people from Minnesotan society and able to do so much damage to ICE's relationship with Minnesota, the federal government's relationship with Minnesota, any federal law enforcement's relationship with Minnesota. ICE is, of course, the worst, but also the Republican Party's relationship with Minnesota, where this is really going to affect the local politics of Minnesota for a time to come. I mean, Tim Walz is right now in the full mode of like, we're in recovery period. We need to heal from the trauma. But at the end of the day, it's not like they're just going to, move on like this never happened. I mean, the national spotlight was dragged to the Twin Cities again. The last time something like this happened was, George Floyd's killing, George Floyd's murder. In this case, I mean, there was Alex Preddy, there was Renee Good, there was these two other people shot, and in every single instance, officials or officers were found lying. Every single instance, they were found lying. How are you supposed to build any sort of trust? I mean, we can all speculate as to why Operation Metro Surge ended, but I think a big contributing factor was public backlash and the fact that operating in Minnesota would only get more and more difficult. And without any cooperation, without any sort of compromise with local officials, they were just going to have to dedicate more and more people to deal with an angrier and angrier public. And that would probably mean also putting less and less trained ICE agents. And when I was there, the ones I was interacting with, man, they were snobby. A lot of like turning their nose up at people. A lot of like snarky back and forth commentary with the people who were like yelling at them from their porch. A lot of like waving at people as they did enforcement operations. And of course, they were very uncomfortable with cameras. Very, very uncomfortable with cameras. But like everybody and their mama was filming. It wasn't like I was doing something special. But seeing my type of camera, I think seeing the type of like an actual film camera instead of just like somebody's phone, maybe that threw them off a little bit more. But they didn't seem to be happy with the cameras, period. I mean, this was a situation that the longer it went on, the worse it was going to be for the Republican Party of Minnesota, for the administration. I mean, anything that happened was under the microscope. I was watching ICE illegally park outside of the Hennepin County Courthouse in Minneapolis, and that was there was like 4 or 5 people filming them. There was like traffic enforcement that came up and walk up to them, and I literally hear like these ICE agents out there like saying, "Is it worth it? Is it worth it?" And I think that's, of course, directed towards the parking enforcement. Like, is it worth it? But is the whole operation worth it? I mean, they got like, what, 3,000 to 4,000 people, according to them, if you believe their numbers. Is that worth the amount of damage they did to ICE and Homeland Security? Homeland Security, DHS, used to have a 59% approval rating during Trump's first term. That's pretty good. I mean, considering how much of the government, what type of approval rating does the IRS have? What type of approval rating does other government agencies have? At 59%, pretty high. Now it's in the 40s, low 40s, like 40%, and it's probably going to be in the 30s before this is all said and done. So, I mean, people can try to like direct any amount of anger they want at Minneapolis. Oh, they should have been more cooperative with, federal law enforcement. Okay. How do you expect locals to react to any politician who tells them we need to cooperate with law enforcement that we are telling you also at the same time aren't respecting your basic American rights? And they're saying that even if you're an American citizen and you're in the radius of an operation, not in a building where raid's happening, but I don't know, you're in the neighborhood, that they might end up carding you. They might end up asking for your identity. It's like you can't get a politician to do that. You can't get a politician to turn to their public and say that. I mean, the compromises that were found to allow some amount of cooperation between, Homan and Tim Walz were already with extreme pressure. I mean, when I was in Minnesota, when I was in Minneapolis, I went to the governor's mansion. They were protesting the governor's mansion. They were protesting. The activist class was outside protesting, letting their discontent known. So this is not something that's going to rebuild by the end of the administration. The relationship with ICE, that's blown away. I mean, any type of federal law enforcement involvement in the city is probably going to be viewed with suspicion. It's not going to come with the same whistles and the same reaction, but it's not going to be reacted to very positively. And I do wonder if this is a sort of turning point. I mean, I had never seen so many Gadsden flags and U.S. veterans marching with young people, working class people, activists, like young hippies, old hippies, like conservatives, like all sorts of people. Now, of course, there were moments when like somebody would yell "fuck Trump" and somebody would be like, "I don't like the cussing." And when you have a tent that big, some people are gonna bump shoulders. But the fact that the tent got that big is a sign that the government really, really messed up, and that's not damage you can so easily undo. And I do wonder if one of the biggest impacts of Operation Metro Surge isn't even necessarily just in Minneapolis. It is people copying that model. Other cities, like for example, what if that new facility that the federal government just bought in Hagerstown in Western Maryland that's going to be processing for them, that they're going to be using for immigration enforcement? What if they start doing an Operation, Crab Surge in Baltimore or whatever, Operation Crab Cake, and they start doing something like this? Would it be surprising if we start seeing the same signal chats popping up in Baltimore, the same whistle tactics popping up in Baltimore, tons of people taking out the cameras and filming? I think it becomes more likely if ICE behaves the way that they behaved in Minneapolis in Baltimore, but I also think that there might be a certain momentum that, has already gotten away from them. Now, this isn't the case everywhere. Obviously, in Texas and Florida, enforcement operations are being met with a lot less resistance, a lot less backlash. But I mean, Minneapolis, if you are not happy with ICE enforcement operations and you want to throw a wrench in them, if you want to throw a wrench in ICE operations, either because of how you view their treatment of the Constitution, people's basic rights, or the separation of families, deportation of all these people, you view what happened in Minneapolis and you see a guidebook. You see instructions. Get the whistles. Get people trained up on how to interact with ICE. Get community outpost guards out there. People on street corners looking out for ICE vehicles. Know to identify ICE vehicles. Tinted windows. Late model SUVs. Masked up feds. Blocked out license plates. Either blocked out with dirt or otherwise removed or out of state. People can learn how to identify ICE agents. People can learn how to copy the same things that Minneapolis did. And people can learn even how to do it better. And so I think it would not be that surprising that either A, if they try to do this again in the same model, that they could even be met with more resistance, that Minneapolis was a sign of things to come if they try this in a cosmopolitan urban setting again. in this manner, or B, they're going to abandon the surge model altogether. See the same problems that I'm identifying with it now at the scale that they're growing ICE's operations and how they're bringing in new recruits. Some of those recruits are lying. You're building a bad reputation in the areas that you're operating. They might get the idea that instead of surging operations and building upwards, we build outwards. We build it wide. Where instead of having 3,000 to 4,000 agents show up in Baltimore, you could put 500 there. And you also put 500 in Chicago. You also put 500 in Miami in the local field office. You put 500 in Texas, and you spread it out in a way where, yes, operations increase, but there's no surge. There's no Operation XXX or whatever to give it a nice militarized, advertised name. You don't have Bovino going around taking videos for social media so you can advertise for everyone to bring as much attention to yourself as possible. I mean, if they take that strategy, trying to actually rally around the flag will be harder because people are not going to know that it's time to rally around the flag. That's why a lot of people in Minneapolis right now are nervous that with the announcement of the end of Operation Metro Surge, people are going to put their guard down. And now it's just going to be increased operations, but of course not at the same rate as Bovino's Customs and Border Patrol sweeps through the neighborhood where they were IDing everybody and anybody. So, depending on how ICE moves forward, depending on how ICE reacts, it's going to lead to different type of community responses. But I would say that the latter option will provide more difficulty for community response than the former, even if the former is louder, more shattered windows, more outward visible trauma. The latter is harder to organize a response to because you don't really necessarily know that there's smoke. So you need to know there's smoke in order to put out the fire.